Today, some eminent Nigerians launched the Fix Politics initiative where speakers bear their minds on the way forward for the nation. We dig deeper into the initiative and the agenda going forward. And some eminent Nigerians under the aegis of concerned professionals say the federal government's approach in handling the NSAS protests in the aftermath and the supporters linked to the protests is wrong. We find out on their stance tonight on the program. Hello everyone and welcome to Politics Today on Channels Television. I'm Sean Kimbala. It's the midweek edition and so we'll be with you within the next 60 minutes. But we begin the program on a rather somber mode. We celebrate the life and times of a former governor of Old Kaduna State, Balarabe Musa, who died earlier today. The former governor of Old Kaduna State died at the age of 85 after a protracted illness. His family confirmed the news of his death to Channels Television in Kaduna. Born on August the 21st, 1936, Abdulkadir Balarabe Musa was a left-wing politician elected governor of Kaduna State in 1979 on the platform of the People's Redemption Party during the Second Republic. He held this office until he was impeached on the 23rd of June, 1981. During Nigeria's Fourth Republic, he was leader of the Conference of Nigerian Political Parties, a coalition of opposition parties. He was outspoken on burning national issues, frequently tackling the ruling establishment on his policies as they affect the masses. Our heart goes out to the family of the elder statesman, Balarabe Musa. Well, some Nigerians are clamoring that there is an urgent need to fix Nigeria's politics. What do they mean by that? And to what effect could that be? Tonight also, we engage on the conversation as the government has been criticized over its handling of the NSAS protests aftermath. Another group is saying that handling is wrong. Those are the two major conversations for tonight, everyone. Do stay with us in this 1 hour stretch of the conversation on Politics Today. Before we get into this conversation, let's check out some other stories on our political roundup.
The Federal Executive Council has approved the ratification of Nigeria's membership of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area from the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment and the purchase of a 3D aerodrome and approach simulator for the Lagos airport for 470.3 million naira. This formed part of the decisions reached at the Federal Executive Council meeting presided over by the President today. At the end of the meeting, the Minister of Information and Culture, Mr. Lai Mohammed, told State House correspondents that he will not answer questions on the NSAS protests since the panels of inquiry investigating the matter have started their work. He was asked the rationale behind blocking the bank accounts of some key NSAS protesters and what the government seeks to gain from the peace meetings, but he insists that any response from him will preempt the findings from the panels of inquiry across the country. The Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) is attributing the successes recorded at the Edo and Ondo governorship elections to an unprecedented and sustained campaign against electoral violence by the Nigerian media. Speaking at a conference in Abuja, the acting chairman of the commission, Air Vice Marshal Ahmed Muazu, notes that save for the pressure from the media organizations which kept candidates on their toes, the two elections could have been marred by violence. He calls for a similar support as the Commission prepares for the conduct of 15 by-elections across 15 states in the country. And 27 elected local government chairmen who were sworn into office in Imo State under the Rochas Okorocha-led administration were suspended by former Governor Emeka Ihedioha, who vowed to return to their offices on November the 30th. They are asking the Imo State Governor, Hope Uzodinma, to dissolve the current interim management committee across the 27 councils, saying their action is based on a recent ruling by the Federal High Court in Owerri, reinstating them into office.
Earlier today, some eminent Nigerians came out on the launch of Fix Politics Initiative. And they say it's an urgent task that must be undertaken to get the nation working for its people. Several leaders, from the former president of Mexico, Felipe Calderon, to former CBN Governor Charles Soludo, Pastor Tunde Bakare, Professor Atahiru Jega, a former Electoral Commission chair, and a host of others. They came to speak on the need for Nigeria to take up the task in fixing its politics. They raised various issues on the problems of Nigeria's politics and proffering solutions to them. Tonight, we'll have the chairperson of the initiative and an economist, a former presidential candidate, former minister in Nigeria, and a former VP at the World Bank, Dr. Obiageli Ezekwesili. She joins us from our Abuja studio. Congratulations, Dr. Ezekwesili, on the successful launch of the Fix Politics Initiative, and you're out in today. Well, this initiative, I understand, is the brainchild of your fellowship awarded by the Richard von Versker Fellowship at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin from September 2019 up until early 2020. Can you give us a clue as to the research findings that you got out of that fellowship?
Yes, thank you very much, Sheung. My research focused on the nexus, in other words, the relationship between politics and economic performance of countries. I was interested in probing that, in just studying that, because you know, I had stepped down from running for office, and what I had seen of politics in that very short period that I was in it just opened my eyes to the fact that in fighting the issues of governance, we were waiting for too late in the day, that it's actually politics that, you know, drives what ultimately becomes governance. And so I wanted to see how politics correlates with economic performance of countries. And so I had to go and have that reflection through the award of the fellowship in Berlin. And a key finding is that any society ignores its politics at its own peril. Any individual, any community, any family, any business ignores politics at their own peril. Politics is extremely correlated with whether society functions or does not function. And second, that politics is what happens in order for you to qualify to be called a democracy. And that the political process is organized in a way that is systemic. And so in my analysis, I came up with something called the triangular pillars of democracy, showing that there are three critical things that define every democracy. You have the electorate, then you have the political class or the politicians, and then you have the regulatory environment in which these two interact in a form of a pyramid. And so the political class and the citizens as the electorate interact. In their interaction, there is an apex body that is constitution, legislation, institutions like the ombudsman for election, the umpire for election, INEC, or the judiciary, and increasingly, in our own case, establishments of the security and such other institutions. Now, in this triangular relationship, there is a continuous intersection and interconnectivity. And this then determines whether you would get the right quality of outcomes in any society. In societies where the electorate are empowered and engaged and are able to make rational choices and decisions about political process and political issues, the political outcomes are good, and therefore you get to good governance. It's even so when you now have the value-based politicians in the political class. In the political class where you've got ethical politicians who are competent, who have character and have capacity, what you get is even higher level of outcomes. And then it is more so when you have an environment, a political context, or the regulatory context that enables independence of arbitration of the interaction between these two groups that are the base angle of the triangle. So it just sort of opened one's eyes to the fact that analytically, most of African countries are stuck in low equilibrium, because the kind of politics that we play is one where you don't see the influence of the electorate, and one where you see that the political class or the politicians have appropriated the entire space of politics to the utter neglect of the demand side of politics, and then where the regulatory context is so weakened and undermined that it does not even act independently. So no wonder we have poor governance. So if you're going to ever get good governance, you must correct your politics and its kind of outcomes.
Indeed, I must say that that event of today was well attended. The speakers also spoke very well, and they touched on a lot of issues relating to the problems of Nigeria, also proffering solutions. But let me quickly ask you, there being some suggestions, especially from the speaker, like the former president of Mexico, where he said politics of a country is at the center of the people's life, and the need to be part of it, there's a need for inclusion. Generally, what resonates with you on some of these issues raised from the speakers today?
So I was and I was very pleased, to hear these speakers really put a voice to what the research was, and the findings were really saying. So it was basically like I went off, did this research, and now I hear people speaking, and it just is very typical of the findings, because I didn't just, sort of think some idea through to my mind. I'm very analytical about issues. So, and politics was just this elephant that I needed to understand better after what I had seen of the Nigerian political terrain. We thought that things were bad, but goodness, you need to understand Nigeria's politics and the way it functions in order for you to realize why we must pay attention to politics. And to hear somebody like the former president of Mexico, clearly stated that any individual in society who is not paying attention to politics is actually undermining himself or herself. And then to know that many of the speakers came back to exactly what the research showed, that the only group in that pyramid that immediately would have an incentive to want to change a system that is broken is the electorate. The electorate, meaning the citizens. So the office of the citizen, which is the emphasis of the research in terms of the pathway out of the paralysis that leads to poor governance, is at the center of every conversation today. So we must pay attention, therefore, to how we improve the engagement as well as the empowered choices of the electorate. And Shehu, when you remember that the electorate in most of Africa, it's made up of two key segments: the low-income class voters and the middle-class voters. There are different issues that concern those two segments. In the case of the low-income class voters, these are voters whose productivity is so low that their vote is not expensive. That's why you have incidents of purchase and sale of vote, right? Because their productivity is so low. Election day is just another day in their lives. And so any amount of money that improves their productivity earning in cash or non-monetary form is definitely an incentive that they would go for. In the case of the middle-class voters, they simply have opted out of the system. They get their voter's card, not because they are planning to vote, but peradventure, they need to show that voter's card in order to board their flight abroad. then they would have a voter's card to show. So that means that you have a serious deficit of electoral influence, electorate influence rather, that you must design to change. And that's what fixed politics is definitely determined to do. One of the ways to change it is that we must have community organizers who are basically waking up the entirety of the Nigerian electorate to the rational choices that they would need to make. We would also blend the kind of innovations that we do with the electorate at the different segments that they represent.
I mean, watching and listening to the speakers today brought out some very important issues, and the understanding of the system also today gave one an insight into some of the problems. There is issues of value, there is issues of the deficiency in our laws, there is issues of the triangle of the system that makes Nigeria work and why it's not working, the old and the traditional political practice and why we need to change them. They also spoke about youth participation. But for the average Nigerian voter or average Nigerian that is watching us now, perhaps on his or her mobile phone in one rural community, either in Warri or in Oko, in Kwara State or in Ijebu-Ode, and watching us right now, what would you say is that one major thing that came out to you today as an urgent problem that needs to be fixed?
I think it's political literacy. You know, so low productivity is one thing. You know, they just need money to survive for a day. So if it is offered them, they wouldn't care what political choices they are making. So we have to fix that. In fixing that, you have to get many more people who are doing interventions to improve productivity of the low-income class outside of the electoral cycle. You need to design their programs of interventions in a way that achieves scale. You need many more people to have barriers to their productivity removed so they can earn more and have more dignity in what choices they are making when it comes to elections and politics. But you need to design in a way that you blend it to political literacy. We need to do urgent and sustained, very methodical voters enlightenment. We need to get to the place where the political consciousness of our poor, they can connect poverty, they can connect the fact that children cannot go to good schools, can't get good health. They can connect it to the fact that there is budget that actually gets passed to do those kinds of things, but they don't get done. And that 4 years later, somebody is up at the field asking them to vote for them. We need to connect their daily lives to the message that politics is what is keeping them stuck to the bottom. And that if there's anyone who can get themselves out of that state of being stuck, they are the ones. They are more powerful than they can even imagine. We need to let our poor know that. They need to understand that poverty is not, it doesn't take away, it mustn't take away dignity. That the dignity they have is that their office is more important than the office of the president. The office of the president is the highest political office in the land, but the office of the citizen, especially a citizen with the power to vote, to determine who the leaders of our public space will be, is more powerful than that of the president, because they give legitimacy to that office of the president. Without that poor man in Ikare or in Enugu or in Karanamoda or anywhere else in this country, the president's office will not happen. So they are powerful.
All right. So we will take a break, first break on the program. But when we come, Dr. Ezekwesili, we will be asking you the practical step and strategies that you have laid out, the bigger picture of the Fixed Politics Initiative. A lot of Nigerians might be looking forward to what, in the end, this will amount to them and for them in the nearest future. Don't go anywhere, everyone. We'll be right back. A concluding moment with Dr. Ezekwesili. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone, and welcome back to the program. Let's get back to the conversation with Dr. Obiageli Ezekwesili, the chairperson of the Fix Politics Initiative, an initiative that was launched earlier today in Nigeria. And the plan is to fix Nigeria's politics. So I know you ran for office in 2019 at the presidential election. You pulled out at some point. And so you have insight into some of these issues. So a lot of people will want to know the bigger picture. Because at the end of the day, politics is not in itself an end, it's a means to an end. So at the end of the day, after all said and done, a lot of people will want to understand and know what is the end game. What is the bigger picture?
So the bigger picture is that we must have a political system that functions on this tripod, where we have the electorate that acts with a lot of influence. And their influence is well understood by a political class that is trained in the art of ethical politics, that also have been trained in the art of statecraft, so that, they understand economy, they understand economics and other social and sectoral policies, and what it takes for a society to grow in every aspect of life, and they also understand governance. That's why, for us, we're going to do the empowering the electorate kinds of activities, but we're also going to run an unconventional school of politics, policy, and governance. It is going to be a school that will produce a really strong a really strong set of public leaders that are driven by values, that are competent in policy, that also can build governance systems. And then we're going to work with the larger public to drive a campaign for the kinds of constitutional change, the political and electoral reform changes that we need in order to have independent arbitration of our political space. So by the time you look at the different initiatives that we're doing along this tripod of the triangular pillars of democracy, we will begin to look like other societies where politics actually upgraded. And when politics upgraded, the quality of governance upgraded, and then the improvement in the lives of citizens began to happen. Because politics is a process toward serving the need of society. In my research, what we saw is that the reason you cannot tell any difference between one political party from the other in Nigeria or in a number of other African countries is that over time, the political class has taken over the political space with a dominant political culture that subordinates the collective good of society to the personal and narrow interests of the politicians. You have to address that. That's why our own program is a program that's systematic and systemic. So it's connected. You can't do one. Part of what we failed in the past to do was to look at this from the holistic kind of approach that the research shows that we must follow. And that's definitely for the long haul. Some people kind of think, oh, do this thing because 2023. No, come on, guys. 2023 is not our end game. Our end game is that we must fix our politics so that we become like nations that were at the same level of development as ourselves, but have now left us so badly behind. Today, Singapore is at $65,000 income per capita. Nigeria is at less than $3,000 income per capita. And yet we set out on the development agenda exactly at the same time in the 60s, having been both colonized by Great Britain at that time.
Dr. Ezekwesili, what message are you sending out to the political class?
Well, the message is simple. We're saying that the kind of monopoly of the political space by a dominant culture, it is that culture that we call the monopoly product. The governance that has been offered by our political class is of a monopolistic nature. There is no competition to it. What we now want to do is that whether it is at the local level, or it's at the state level, or it's at the national level, whether it is for legislative office or for executive office in our democracy, we're going to have a massive scale of people who have now been trained to say we represent a different mindset of politics as service. That's what the unconventional school of politics, policy, and governance will do. Every 6 months, we're going to train we would train 500 such people. Imagine what would happen in 10 years' time. We would have a different class of people who are in politics in our country, talking differently and doing especially differently.
There are a few problems that have been identified along the way, aside the issue of educating the masses, the electorate. One of it is the issue of the deficiency in our electoral law. Others include the issues of the consequence of electoral offenses. And another is citizens' participation. How many of our citizens genuinely go out to participate in politics, perhaps in voting process? So talk us through briefly, the strategy in achieving this end game that you have set out.
Citizens' participation, look at it. The turnout for presidential election in 2019 was somewhere around 35%. Now, at the dawn of our democracy in 1999, we were almost hitting 60%. I think it must have been 57%. Over the course of 8 elections or thereabout after, the interest of the citizens waned. And that's because they did not see the value in staying engaged in the process. We're going to have programs that address that. By the way, this whole thing is based on partnership. We are not interested in being some tiny group that's doing something about this. We're basically going to make sure that we connect the dots and that you can build a massive army of people who are organizing in their communities to raise voter participation. We already have incredible number of people saying, I want to be part of the community organizers to make sure that my community understand the power that they have in elections. On the matter of on the other questions that you asked, if you looked at the political system and the way that it is configured, you would see that some of our laws require reform. For example, when you look at what the Uwais committee did in harmonizing some of the important reforms that we need to the electoral legislation, you can tell that the independence of INEC is one that we still must fight for. We cannot afford to have a situation where a person who was recently just on the on social media being a complete disaster to the government by not engaging with citizens, but rather spending time insulting citizens who have a criticism or one or the other to make about the way governance goes is in INEC as a commissioner. That is so partisan. That's so blatant. It's such gross behavior to find. And that's because the electoral law permits the president to act in that kind of a way. So there are many aspects of electoral law that would need changing. Look at political parties. Political parties, in my research, we found that in many of the countries, they end up becoming vehicles of transaction. They simply don't represent an ideology. They do not represent a philosophy. They do not even shape the values of society. And this has to change. So all of those things are under the regulatory environment that I spoke about. And the citizens are going to rise up and say, we want a society where our votes count. That, for example, is what we saw in Georgia. A woman got up in Georgia and she was cheated when she ran for governor. And she decided they did not make votes count in this state, or Georgia in America. I'm going to make sure that votes count. And she went to work on it. We must be persistent. We cannot afford to be people who are always thinking short term. I want it to be that fixed politics over the next 20 years would so change and transform our political processes, our outcomes in this society, that we would then see that children that are born into Nigeria can be global peers of any other of their groups born elsewhere, simply because we have a society that works, a society that delivers, regardless of who you are. We need to build an inclusive society. We need to not, diss our poor. It's almost like the poor are invisible to us. It shouldn't be so. The poor are so disempowered to the point where they have learned the disempowerment themselves. They feel like they can't change anything. It's not true. The poor, the day the rage of the poor gets out in this country, that's when the political class will understand. And I think we saw a little bit of it with the young people who said, enough is enough. You killed enough of young people for nothing, without any form of consequence. And they went to stand against it. That we risk having a situation where the citizens of this country, rather than following a process of conversation with the political class to solve the problems of society, now begin to engage in a violent way of doing it. That should not be the case. We should be able to have a decent society that holds healthy debates on the challenges we have and the opportunities we must translate.
All right. Dr. Ezekwesili, to wrap up this segment of the conversation, in 30 seconds, I will do that. It does look like what you're describing to us tonight is a game changer. How soon should Nigerians be expecting this? Because it looks so interesting to hear. And how far-reaching would this be in 30 seconds, if you can give us your final thoughts?
It would be extremely far-reaching. We're determined, we're determined to engage in sustained actions. We have incredible Nigerians who have come together to do this. And it's not just going to be it's not just about being far-reaching. It is not a sprint for us. It is a marathon. And we're determined to carry on this journey. The school is going to open up in January. Our first set of students will be in January, and we're going to get the best of students. The kind of strong appetite we already have for the school is amazing. About every 6 months, we will take people with character, competence, and capacity, and then give them this module of training of 34 courses in politics, in policy, and in governance. Prepare them to be leaders that would take charge of the public space. And then all our programs that would empower the electorate would start almost immediately. Our community organizers program is going to be launched very soon. So we're not talking of, we're preparing. We're ready. And we're just asking everyone who cares about a decent society to simply join us and fix politics.
Dr. Obiageli Ezekwesili, former VP at the World Bank and former minister here in Nigeria, chairperson of the Fixed Politics Initiative. Thank you indeed for talking to us tonight and coming on the show.
Thank you.
Let's switch gears now, shall we? A group of professionals under the aegis of Concerned Professionals has described the arrest and closing of accounts of some of the NSAS protesters as a wrong approach by the federal government. In a statement jointly signed on behalf of the group by former legal advisor to the APC, Musa, human rights lawyer Femi Falana, and Professor Pat Utomi, among others, the group notes that contrary to expectations, that the aftermath of the process would make the government adopt more pragmatic measures in addressing the issues raised. The government has resorted to witch hunting. Let's get more on what this group means. Let's speak with one of the members of the group, Senior Advocate of Nigeria and a former legal advisor of the APC, Mr. Musa Banire. He joins us right now from Ikeja, Lagos. Thank you so much, Mr. Banire, for joining us tonight. Let's begin by understanding what your group means by the federal government as taking a wrong approach.
Well, thank you very much. Our position is simple that most of the things that are going on after the protest are not those that we can describe as being bona fide. What has been bona fide, that is being done in good faith, particularly with the intervention of so many people to get the NSAS protesters back to their base. Our expectation is that the government will continue to engage them in a very meaningful manner rather than what is going on all around now. But for example, as you rightly said, in one of the situations, we found a situation where somebody's passport was impounded, but eventually that was released and explanation and apology given. But we see have a lot of other instances of harassment of some of these people, and we believe that that shouldn't be the approach at all. Rather than doing that, we believe more in engagement of these people, because they, whether we like it or not, they are not even leaders of tomorrow again, they are leaders of today. They need to be engaged in a very, very conducive atmosphere. We are not to terrorize them, we must not harass them, and we must not force them to leave their country.
So, you said it's a wrong approach. You said that the government is not trusted by the people, which, according to your statement, led to the elongation of the protest. Start by also clarifying for us the position of a law in the stand of the CBN, for example, where in the case that was the court order that was gained to freeze the account of 19 persons and one organization. You are a senior advocate. Give us an insight into that.
Well, there is a provision in the Central Bank and Other Financial Institutions Act, BOFIT, to the particular, I think specifically Section 68B or thereabout, that confers on the Central Bank the right to seek expertise order where they have the impression that a particular account is being used in a criminal manner. But the truth of the matter is that in this instance, we all know what has transpired. But unfortunately, the order itself, in my very strong view, is flawed. When I read the order, I saw that the order granted by the judge is to the effect that to enable the Central Bank of Nigeria to carry out inquiry and investigation. How will you freeze somebody's account after and then go back to investigation and inquiry? I'm sure that is a case of putting the car before the horse. But beyond that itself, the law does not even say that. What the law says is that even where you do so, you must escalate the matter to the Nigerian police or any of the other security agency, not for the Central Bank to start investigation and inquiry. So to that extent, I believe that that order is flawed.
So if you criticize in the position of the federal government, rightly, what do you think the federal government should have done instead?
Well, in the first instance, my expectation is that the federal government, as promised or pledged by the president in his speech, should have just gone ahead, engage them in respect of the 5 demands of the youth. And beyond that also, try to build confidence in this youth. The truth of the matter, I said we are deceiving ourselves, is that Nigerians generally and large, they tend not to trust the government in anything. In fact, to a large extent, when government says no, most Nigerians interpret it to mean yes. And in a situation like this, where the youth themselves have come out to say, look, we do not trust you. Anything you say, you are not going to live up to the expectation. The least that we can do post the protest should have been that we engage them to put this trust that we haven't promised that we will deliver this, we are going ahead to do it. The regrettable thing is that, and from my experience with the government, particularly at the federal level, I'm not too sure. I must confess that the president is aware of it, because if you recall in his speech, he did say that as far as he's concerned, he recognized the right of the people of Nigeria to protest. But the truth is that we have so many overzealous public officials who will go out of their way in order to want, in the process of attempting to impress the president, to do things that are not only retrogressive, they are even barbaric. How will you freeze somebody's account for 90, 180 days without any investigation? In the first instance, Central Bank is not it cannot be investigating crime. We know by the law that, by the constitution of this country, agencies that can investigate crime. And if you must do that, the reality of the matter is that that must have been done before you approach the court. I would rather even prefer a situation where such power must be, as a matter of urgency, deleted, because it's going to haunt all of us. It's a bad precedent. The reality is that the senators, I even understand and I know that the central bank is usually pushing for the expansion of that provision before the Senate if they do amendment. That, in my very strong view, must be opposed and rejected. And Nigerians generally must rise up, must speak up against this provision. It can be abused, and it's being abused in my very strong view. You cannot just wake up one morning and start freezing people's account because you suspect. You haven't even done your inquiry. You haven't done your investigation according to the order. That, in my view, is very, very wrong, and it must be condemned by all.
Stay with us, Mr. Balarabe, because there are other angles to it. We understand that the Apex Bank is alleging that the transaction in those frozen accounts that cause economic and security harm. We'll look deeper into that and perhaps the way forward from all of this. Don't go anywhere, everyone. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Let's get back to the conversation with Mr. Musa Balarabe, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, a former legal advisor of the APC, one of the concerned professionals. Some Nigerians who have come out today to criticize the move of the government in the approach to the NSAS protesters and some of the developments that we've seen. Mr. Balarabe, you sound disappointed tonight about some of the decisions of the federal government. But you're a member of the ruling APC. You served as the legal advisor of the party. What do you perceive has become the problem in a party that you partook in its forming, and you also served as a legal advisor? Something dramatically changed, or what is wrong?
Well, let me start by correcting the impression that I am a member of the ruling party. I was a member of the ruling party. So it's not a past tense. And I'm sure you should be aware of that almost 2 years now. But the truth of the matter is that what has changed in the system, in my very frank view, is lack of coordination. Because you discover that an agency will do something unknown to the other arm of the government, or one arm will do something, the other arm is not aware of it. So there is no proper coordination. And I think that's the major challenge here. There's no proper coordination. You saw the situation with the passport also. Somebody's passport was wrongly impounded. Eventually, there was intervention from another quarter to say it should be released. Now, in this situation, I'm quite optimistic that certainly it cannot be a product of the presidency. It must be as a result of somebody somewhere who feels that he has some measure of power to exercise over the people. And he must show that I'm a good boy. That's all.
So, Mr. Balarabe, when the Apex Bank alleged that the transactions in some of the frozen accounts could be related to funding of terror or can cause economic and security harm, what's your reaction to that stance?
Well, maybe they are saying that in their private offices. What is contained in the order is that the order is just enabling them to do inquiry on investigation, which presupposes that nothing has been done in the first instance, but just rushing to court to obtain the ex parte order. The order is clear. And secondly, again, is that there are enough provision in all the security agencies' laws capable of dealing or addressing this situation. I do not believe that it should be the business or the concern of the central bank to be dealing in such issues. We have security outfits in the country which can deal with all those issues relating to security, and they also have the enabling power to freeze any account if they so suspect. But the reality is that what we now find out is a situation where the central bank will take it upon itself to go and secure an order to start freezing people's account. In my very strong view, again, I believe it's an unconstitutional provision, and I do expect that that provision should be challenged. And everybody should speak out, particularly members of the National Assembly. They might be enjoying it today. I can assure them it's a dangerous precedent that tomorrow is coming to haunt some of them, and you will now see them jumping up. The reality is that not in a democratic society should you have that kind of provision in the Banking and Financial Institutions Act. So for me, I believe we have enough provision domiciled in the legislation establishing the various security that could have dealt with that situation. But even right now, as I said to you, there's nothing that has been indicated, contrary to the provision section 68B of that particular act, that is the police or any of the other security agencies that is going to do the investigation. What is in the order is that to enable central bank to now go and conduct a query investigation. Then how did you come to court to say this person that can't be suspicious? Whereas we all even know who these people are. And we know there are people that participated in the last protest, and there are people who actually are more or less being hooded in the environment now. So for me, I don't think that is good enough a reason. It's not good enough a reason at all on the part of the central bank. The central bank should focus on the economy and other financial matters. Leave the job of security to those who are specialists in those areas. I don't understand from my own law when central bank becomes a criminal investigation body.
Quickly, Mr. Balarabe, try to help, because in the statement released by your group today, the issue of victimization, harassment came up very frequently. And let me read a portion of that statement. It reads that no amount of intimidation or harassment will work, as it will only exacerbate tensions in an otherwise fragile polity. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's simple. There is nowhere, to the best of my knowledge, where that works. Peaceful engagement is always the solution to it. Dialogue is always the solution. If you make peaceful engagement impossible, then you are certainly inviting violence. That's the meaning. Nowhere has that worked. At the end of the day, it will be dialogue. So why don't you just start with dialogue? Dialogue with them, talk to them. Even let's assume the worst scenario that they've been wrong. Government needs to demonstrate some measure of maturity in accommodating them. We are training them to be our leaders. Whether we like it or not, they will eventually displace us. What example, what precedent are we setting?
All right. Quickly, I'd like to get your reaction. You said you quit active politics. So are you saying that you quit the APC, or you've left politics, and what are you up to?
Well, for APC, I'm done. For politics, I would say that for now, I'm keeping my fingers crossed to see what will happen. For example, the kind of initiative that adjusts the fixed policies initiative probably will encourage some of us to go back into it. Because truly, we cannot leave it to these charlatans. It's a bit dangerous. So I might have a reconsideration, maybe eventually or in the nearest future, but certainly not now that I'm addressing you.
So you are majorly now focusing on your law practice?
Oh, certainly.
All right. So perhaps on a final note, and briefly too, what perhaps is your message tonight to the young Nigerians, or your advice to them, some of them who are experiencing what you have described in your statement today?
Well, sorry, I didn't get the second leg of your question.
I said on the final note. Okay, yeah. Okay, so let me shoot again. I said on the final note, and briefly too, what's your message and your advice to the young Nigerians, some of whom are experiencing, some of those who came out to the street and were agitating on social media?
Well, my advice to them for now is to become, engage themselves in productive change, particularly get involved in politics. They need to get involved. All of them need to go and get their PVC. Encourage others to get their PVC. Now, in my very strong view, is their time. And of course, initiatives such as that have just been launched must be encouraged all over the whole place. So that at the end of the day, they themselves, if there is any lacuna in their leadership capacity, we can improve it. As I always tell people, if we say they lack the capacity to lead us, then we are indirectly inducting ourselves. That means we have failed as leaders to have brought them up properly. So for me, I will encourage them to continue to engage the system in a very, very peaceful manner.
All right. Mr. Muiz Banner, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, thank you so much for talking to us tonight on Channels Television. Well, that's our show for today, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm Sean Kimale. Bye for now.